Welcome. Tonight you are invited to set aside the weight of the day and step into a slower rhythm. The hours behind you may have been filled with noise, decisions, or movement, but here, in this quiet, there is only the gentle flow of words and the calm presence of your own breath. There is no urgency. Sleep may arrive quickly, or it may take its time. Either way, these words will accompany you, steady and patient, like a lantern carried through a long corridor. If you wish to hear more journeys like this one, you might consider subscribing, so we may continue to bring you calm reflections, night after night. This evening, the story we will follow belongs to ice. It is a substance so familiar that we almost overlook it, yet so extraordinary that it has shaped entire continents and preserved the memory of worlds long past. Ice waits quietly in the high mountains, in the frozen seas, and beneath the crust of distant moons. It has no voice of its own, yet its presence has carved valleys, guided rivers, and sheltered creatures in places where warmth is scarce. It has served as both barrier and bridge, as threat and savior, as obstacle and gift. Imagine water, flowing and restless, suddenly pausing in its eternal movement. As the air cools, the molecules slow, until at last they lock together in delicate patterns that repeat endlessly. In that moment of stillness, water changes character. What was once fluid and fleeting becomes solid and enduring. What once ran away from the hand now lingers, holding its shape against time. From something ordinary emerges a quiet geometry, the first suggestion that ice is not merely frozen water, but a designer with its own patient intentions. Across the surface of our world, ice has drawn lines and etched boundaries. It has piled itself into white domes that rise like continents of silence. It has pressed against stone until mountains wore down, leaving valleys in their wake. It has floated upon oceans like a glass skin, regulating the breathing of the sea. All the while, it has worked without recognition, sculpting a planet in slow strokes so vast that no single generation could fully see them unfold. To speak of ice is to speak of time itself. Human lives are measured in decades, perhaps a century if fortune allows. Ice measures in millennia. It records, it shapes, it endures. It holds within it not only frozen water, but frozen memory. To touch an ancient glacier is to place your hand upon the same substance that formed in the breath of animals long gone, in the winds of climates we will never experience. Ice carries those moments forward, preserving them in silence until we look closely enough to see. And yet, despite its power, ice is fragile. It can fracture with the slightest change of warmth. It can vanish with a single season's shift. This duality strength across eons, fragility within days, makes it one of nature's most paradoxical builders. It is at once invincible and vulnerable, eternal and temporary. Tonight, we will follow its story. We will trace its patterns, from the smallest crystal to the greatest sheet, from Earth's hidden depths to the frozen edges of distant planets. As we move, the story will not rush. It will unfold as ice itself unfolds, patiently, steadily, layer upon layer, and in that slowness, perhaps you will find a rhythm that carries you into stillness as well. If we look closely, far closer than the eye can manage unaided, we discover that ice begins as a simple act of gathering. A single water molecule, shaped like a small V, drifts in constant motion. It bends and turns, vibrating with energy. As the air cools, the motion slows, until the molecule begins to align itself with others, forming bonds. Each one links to its neighbors at precise angles, repeating the pattern over and over, until a lattice emerges. This lattice is hexagonal, a six-fold symmetry born not from design but from the natural constraints of the molecule itself. And yet it appears as though intention is at work. From chaos arises order. From random motion comes a shape both delicate and strong. Snowflakes inherit this geometry, branching outward in intricate arms that mirror the same repeating pattern. Each flake is different because each falls along a unique path through the sky, collecting or losing water molecules as it drifts. But at the heart of every one lies that same hexagonal rhythm, the quiet signature of ice, There is something reassuring in this, the notion that in the midst of endless variety, there is a common foundation. Billions of flakes may fall, no two alike, yet all share the same inner design. Diversity and unity are not opposites here, but companions. One of the most remarkable qualities of this frozen structure is its tendency to expand rather than contract. Most substances grow denser when they solidify, sinking in their liquid forms. Ice does the opposite. Its bonds hold space open, creating a lattice that is less dense than liquid water. This is why ice floats. A lake that freezes does so from the top down, forming a protective lid beneath which fish and plants continue to live. Without this unusual behavior, many bodies of water would freeze solid in winter, extinguishing life within them. Instead, ice preserves life by sheltering it. In this sense, ice is more than a transformation of water. It is a safeguard, a quiet custodian of ecosystems. When the cold comes, it does not strip away all possibility of survival. Instead, it creates a thin, crystalline roof beneath which warmth lingers. Beneath frozen lakes, frogs hibernate, insects rest in suspended animation, and currents continue to move slowly. Ice, though still and silent, allows the living world to wait. The geometry of ice also creates clarity and brilliance in the natural world. The way crystals bend and scatter light produces the sparkle we see when sunlight touches snow. Millions of mirrored surfaces glint at once, dazzling the eye, yet each reflection comes from the same simple order. What feels like infinite beauty is born of a single molecular arrangement, repeated countless times. To imagine this process is to slow down, to recognize how structure arises from patience. The molecules do not rush. They do not force themselves into shape. They simply align, one after another, until a pattern emerges, until the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. The quiet discipline of ice is a reminder that form can be born from stillness. When you think of a frozen pond, a snow-covered field, or a single flake resting briefly on a window, you are witnessing this invisible architecture made visible. Tiny angles, multiplied across countless bonds, become sheets, drifts, and glaciers. The world we walk through each winter is built from the smallest acts of connection, each one a whisper of the geometry that underlies nature. When we lift our gaze beyond the blue skies of Earth, ice greets us again, scattered across the vastness of space. It is not confined to our lakes or mountains, but drifts through the cosmos as one of the most abundant forms of solid matter. Wherever water has traveled in the universe, it has paused at some point to rest as ice. On distant moons, entire oceans lie hidden beneath thick frozen shells. Europa, circling Jupiter, wears an icy crust tens of kilometers deep. Cracks spread across its surface like veins of light, suggesting tides rising and falling beneath. Occasionally, plumes burst skyward, shooting jets of water vapor into space, reminders of a restless ocean below. Enceladus, a smaller moon orbiting Saturn, holds similar secrets. Geysers erupt through its southern poles, spraying ice crystals into the planet's rings. To look at these worlds is to realize that ice is not merely a surface. Sometimes it is the guardian of an entire sea. Pluto, at the edge of our solar system, is cloaked in ices stranger than those of Earth. Frozen nitrogen, methane, and carbon monoxide glaze its plains, forming landscapes that shimmer in soft light. The heart-shaped region called Sputnik Planitia is a basin filled with frozen nitrogen that flows slowly, like glaciers do here. Even in that deep cold, movement continues. Ice, patient as ever, shifts and rearranges the surface of a world billions of kilometers away. Comets, too, are made of frozen material. Often described as dirty snowballs, they wander through space carrying ices older than planets. When they approach the sun, their frozen shells vaporize, forming luminous tails that stretch across the night sky. To watch a comet is to witness ancient ice set free, whispering secrets of the early solar system as it burns away. Some theories even suggest that comets once delivered water to our young Earth, scattering the seeds of oceans. Beyond our solar system, astronomers find evidence of ice on exoplanets circling distant stars, and in the dusty regions where new systems are born, it clings to grains of dust in nebulae, waiting for gravity to gather it into comets and planets. In this way, ice is not just part of Earth's story, it is part of the universe's grammar, a recurring element in the sentences that write new worlds. There is comfort in knowing that what lies in your glass on a winter day also rests upon distant moons and circles alien suns. It is a reminder of connection, that across the impossible distances of space, the same molecular structures repeat. Ice links us to places we may never visit, bridging the familiar with the unimaginable. And yet, though it is everywhere, ice does not boast. It waits quietly on mountaintops, drifts across interstellar dust, rests beneath alien skies. It does not announce its role, though it has preserved oceans, shaped landscapes, and perhaps even carried the ingredients of life across the dark. To reflect on this is to feel both small and immense. Small, because our lives are a fleeting flicker beside the grandeur of these frozen worlds. Immense, because the same frozen molecules that fall as snow outside our windows are also etched into the fabric of the cosmos. Ice, it seems, is a thread weaving through the universe, binding us to places beyond imagination. Beneath our feet, in the deepest layers of glaciers and polar ice sheets, lies a library written not in ink or stone but in frozen water. Each winter, snow falls, settles, and is compressed by the weight of seasons that follow. Over time, those layers turn to ice, trapping tiny fragments of the world as it once was. Dust from deserts, ash from volcanoes, salt from ancient seas, even microscopic pollen grains, all are sealed away, one layer atop another. What results is a timeline, a memory preserved in silence. Scientists who drill ice cores in Greenland or Antarctica are, in a sense, opening the pages of this frozen chronicle. Each meter down represents decades or centuries. At the deepest depths, the cores reach back hundreds of thousands of years, carrying with them the breath of animals long vanished and the whispers of climates no human ever saw. Tiny bubbles of air, once part of the living sky, are captured whole within the ice. To hold such a fragment is to hold the atmosphere of another world, one that existed before cities, before agriculture, even before language as we know it. Imagine breathing in the faintest trace of air exhaled by mammoths, or the residue of a forest that once thrived where now there is tundra. Ice does not forget. It carries the voices of firestorms, the drifting dust of shifting continents, the soot of ancient meteors. Each layer is a record of both violence and calm, of summers too warm and winters too long. There is a quiet humility in this preservation. Unlike books, which require authors, or stones, which demand interpretation, ice gathers without intention. It accepts whatever falls upon it, recording without bias, storing without commentary. What it offers is not a story told, but a story kept. It is up to us to learn how to read it, and when we do, the revelations are profound. From ice cores we learn of cycles in Earth's climate, the rhythm of ice ages advancing and retreating. We discover that the air has changed, that levels of greenhouse gases rise and fall with the pulse of the planet. We see that nothing in nature is permanent, not even the balance of the atmosphere we breathe. Yet, even as it reminds us of change, ice also assures us of continuity. Through catastrophe and calm, through extinction and rebirth, it has quietly kept the record. The presence of those frozen bubbles means that the past has not been lost. It waits, suspended, until we choose to listen. To imagine these cores, long cylinders of layered ice rising from deep boreholes, is to imagine time itself stacked neatly in translucent blue. Each layer is a year, or 10, or 100, stretching backward until the present seems like only the thinnest surface. Standing before such a core is like standing before a cathedral of memory. It humbles, it steadies, it makes us aware that we walk not only upon ground but upon archives, written patiently by frost. And so, the ice beneath us is not just frozen water. It is a quiet historian, keeping the breath of ages safe within its grasp, until we are ready to learn from it. High in the mountains and across the great polar expanses, rivers of ice move silently. At first glance, they seem frozen in place, as if they have always been and will always remain. Yet glaciers flow, creeping forward day by day, their movement too slow for casual eyes to see. What looks like stillness is in fact relentless motion, an unhurried shaping of the land. Picture stone, solid and enduring. Even mountains appear eternal, but under the weight of centuries, ice presses against them, grinding rock into powder, carving valleys with patience unmatched. The smooth curves of a fjord, the broad sweep of a U-shaped valley, the scattered fields of boulders left behind, these are the quiet signatures of glaciers. The hand that sculpted them was not swift, but it was sure. As a glacier advances, it plucks stones from the ground, carrying them embedded within its frozen body. These rocks become tools of abrasion, grinding the earth beneath like sandpaper drawn across wood. The result is a polished surface, stone worn to a sheen by nothing more than frozen water in motion. Later, when the ice retreats, it leaves behind ridges of gravel and clay, known as moraines, and deep basins that will become lakes. Entire landscapes are rearranged by this long, slow labor. Think of the great ice sheets that once covered North America and Europe. They buried forests and hills beneath kilometers of ice, advancing southward with an unstoppable quiet. When they melted, they revealed new geographies. The Great Lakes, broad plains where once there were mountains, the winding courses of rivers redirected by ice's passing. Civilizations would one day rise on those plains, never realizing they owed their existence to the sculpting patience of glaciers. There is poetry in the idea that something so soft as water, when frozen and gathered in great masses, can wear down even the hardest stone. What fire and storm may not accomplish, ice does, not through violence but through persistence. Its power lies not in speed but in endurance. To walk in a glacial valley today is to walk through a gallery of ice's artistry, though the artist itself may now be gone. Jagged peaks stand where ice carved sharp ridges. Lakes shine in hollows once pressed by frozen weight. Even the soil beneath our feet, rich and fertile, often owes its origin to glacial grinding, which turned rock into the fine dust that nourishes fields. The bread we eat, the crops that sustain us, may be traced back to the patient chiseling of ice. And still, glaciers continue their work in the high places of our world. In the Himalayas, in the Andes, in the Alps, they move with quiet determination, feeding rivers that carry life to billions. Though smaller than the ice sheets of the past, they remain architects of landscapes and stewards of water. When we think of architecture, we imagine design drawn by human hands. Yet the greatest architecture of Earth, the valleys, basins, and mountains as we know them, was drawn slowly, invisibly, by frozen rivers. Glaciers remind us that the most profound changes often happen not in sudden upheaval, but in quiet persistence over time. Far to the north and south, oceans wear a shifting skin of ice. Unlike the glaciers of land, which grind down stone, sea ice forms a floating shield, expanding in winter and retreating in summer. To watch it from above is to see the planet breathe, inhaling with the cold, exhaling with the warmth. The rhythm is slow and steady, not unlike the rise and fall of your own breath as you lie here now. In winter, the Arctic Ocean grows still beneath a ceiling of frozen water. What begins as fragile crystals soon join, linking into broad sheets that spread outward until the sea itself appears solid. The surface may seem barren, a desert of white stretching toward the horizon, yet beneath this frozen roof life continues. Algae bloom within the ice, feeding krill and tiny fish. Seals dive below, surfacing through breathing holes they keep open with patient effort. Even in stillness, there is abundance. Come summer, much of this frozen covering melts, retreating until only patches remain. The ocean awakens to movement, but always the ice returns when the air cools again. This cycle of advance and retreat has endured for millennia, a quiet clock by which the polar world keeps time. To rest within that rhythm is to understand that life does not demand constant activity. Sometimes survival depends on stillness, on waiting, on letting the world shift at its own pace. The presence of sea ice does more than shelter life below. Its pale surface reflects sunlight back into the sky, helping to regulate the temperature of the planet. Without it, the oceans would absorb more heat, the balance would tilt, and climates far beyond the poles would change. In this way, a thin sheet of frozen water influences forests, fields, and deserts far away. Ice at the edge of the world quietly shapes the conditions of life everywhere. To stand upon such a surface is to feel both the strength and fragility of frozen water. The sheet may stretch for hundreds of kilometers, yet it creaks beneath weight, shifting with tides and winds. Cracks open suddenly, creating leads of open water where whales surface to breathe. Pressure ridges rise where sheets collide, jagged walls sculpted by slow force. What seems unchanging is in fact always in motion. The Inuit, who have lived alongside Arctic ice for countless generations, understand its language. They read the patterns of cracks, the sound of shifting flows, the color of snow upon ice. To them, the frozen sea is not an obstacle but a living landscape, one that can be navigated, read, and respected. Their wisdom is a reminder that ice, though formidable, can also be a companion. As you imagine these vast frozen expanses, let your own breath match their rhythm. Expansion, contraction, stillness, return. Just as sea ice follows the seasons, your body follows its cycles of wakefulness and rest. If sleep comes soon, let it drift in like the quiet spread of winter ice. If not, there is no hurry. The story will carry you, patient as the frozen ocean itself. In these cycles of ice, we see endurance not through rigidity, but through flexibility. The ocean accepts its covering and lets it go, over and over again. So too do we live by cycles, gaining strength from both activity and rest. Though we often think of ice as mute, it does not keep entirely silent. It speaks, in tones deep and sharp, subtle and startling. To linger near a frozen lake or a vast glacier is to hear a hidden orchestra, a music shaped by pressure, temperature, and movement. Imagine standing on the edge of a frozen lake in winter. The surface is solid, a smooth sheet stretching far and wide. Yet as the air cools and the ice contracts, tension ripples through its structure. Suddenly, a sound rings out, like the crack of a whip, sharp and echoing across the still air. Another follows, lower this time, a resonant boom that seems to roll beneath your feet. These sounds are not signs of collapse, but of shifting, as the frozen sheet adjusts to its own expansion and contraction. The lake becomes a drum, and the cold air amplifies its song. Glaciers, too, have voices. They creak as they move, ice sliding slowly over rock. When water beneath them lubricates their path, the motion becomes uneven, producing groans and rumbles like distant thunder. At times, pieces of ice break free, crashing into the sea with a roar, sending ripples outward that echo for miles. Each fracture is both sudden and ancient, a momentary release of tension built over centuries. There are more delicate sounds as well. In some polar regions, when the sea freezes and then begins to melt, thin sheets of ice collide gently in the wind. They clink together like glass, creating a soft, chiming chorus. Locals sometimes call it singing ice. To hear it is to be reminded that even in the harshest cold, beauty emerges as music. Scientists who study the poles have learned to listen to these voices with sensitive instruments. Beneath the ice, microphones record faint pops and crackles as air bubbles escape from melting sheets. Each sound tells a story, of pressure changing, of currents flowing, of the planet itself adjusting to the shifting balance of cold and warmth. There is something almost comforting about these sounds, though they can be startling at first. They remind us that even apparent stillness is alive with activity. What seems frozen and immovable is, in truth, always changing, always adjusting. The groan of a glacier is not so different from the settling creak of a house in the night. It is the sound of a structure adapting to its own weight, reshaping itself quietly with time. To listen deeply to ice is to be reminded that silence is rarely complete. Even in stillness there are murmurs, resonances, vibrations. They rise and fade, leaving us with a sense that the frozen world is not a void, but a place alive with subtle voices. And in these voices, there is patience. The notes may be sharp, the rumbles deep, but they come from processes that span centuries. Each sound is a fragment of a much longer story, one we are fortunate enough to catch only in passing. When you imagine the crack across a frozen lake or the sigh of a moving glacier, let it remind you that what appears quiet often holds hidden music. Just as your own thoughts and dreams shift beneath the surface of rest, ice too carries its rhythms, its resonances, its song. Wherever ice spreads its reach, life follows. At first it seems improbable. The frozen seas and vast glaciers appear barren, silent expanses with little to sustain even the simplest of creatures. Yet closer observation reveals a world not of emptiness but of resilience, where animals have learned to turn scarcity into survival. To live with ice is to adapt not only to cold, but to the shifting boundaries between solid and liquid, between shelter and danger. Consider the polar bear roaming the drifting platforms of Arctic sea ice. To the bear, this frozen sheet is more than a surface, it is a hunting ground. Seals surface through breathing holes in the ice, and the bear waits, patient, unmoving, until the moment comes. Its thick fur, hollow to trap warmth, and a dense layer of fat keep it alive, even when the air plunges to temperatures most creatures could not endure. Yet its dependence on the ice is absolute. Without the frozen sea to extend its reach, the bear's survival grows precarious. In the fate of this single species, we glimpse the intricate ties between animal life and the presence of ice. Far to the south, in Antarctica, penguins gather in colonies that stretch across the white horizon. Emperor penguins, the largest of their kind, breed in the coldest conditions of any bird. They huddle together by the thousands, forming living walls that shield those within from the worst of the wind. Adults take turns guarding eggs balanced on their feet, covered by folds of skin to keep them warm. The endurance required is immense, yet life continues here in patterns as steady as the shifting ice itself. Beneath the frozen sea, another world thrives. Within the ice, microscopic algae grow, nourished by the faint light that filters through. These invisible plants feed swarms of krill, tiny shrimp-like creatures that gather in vast numbers. Whales, seals, and birds all depend on this chain of life, sustained by nothing more than sunlight caught in frozen water. What seems lifeless above becomes, below, a foundation for entire ecosystems. Seals adapt to the ice in ways equally remarkable. Some carve breathing holes through meters of frozen sea, returning to the same openings day after day. Others give birth upon the ice itself, raising pups in a nursery that floats with the ocean's movements. Walruses haul their heavy bodies onto ice floes, resting together in herds, their tusks glinting against the white. To them, ice is home and refuge, a place from which they dive into waters rich with clams and fish. Even the smallest creatures show astonishing adaptations. Arctic foxes follow polar bears across the frozen sea, scavenging what the great hunters leave behind. Their fur changes with the seasons, brown in summer to blend with rock and tundra, pure white in winter to vanish against snow. Lemmings burrow beneath drifts of snow, creating hidden tunnels that insulate them from the biting air above. For them, snow is not an enemy but a shelter, an invisible blanket beneath which life continues. There is poetry in this resilience. The animals of the frozen world do not resist the presence of ice. They embrace it. They use it for hunting, for shelter, for breeding. They live by its cycles, moving with its expansion and retreat. In their survival, we see an acceptance of rhythm, an attunement to conditions that would seem impossible to us. And so, when we imagine ice as silent or barren, we miss the truth. Ice is alive with movement, with sound, with adaptation. It supports creatures that thrive where others cannot. It is not only an architect of landscapes but also a host of worlds, each life tied to the frozen stage upon which it performs its part. In the presence of these animals, the frozen realm feels less desolate and more complete. The bear stalking across floes, the penguin sheltering its chick, the whale rising through cracks in the ice, all are actors in a drama that has played for countless generations. They remind us that even in the most forbidding conditions, life finds a way, shaped and sustained by ice. For as long as humans have walked the earth, ice has been both companion and challenge. In places where winter reigns for most of the year, people have learned to live not against the frozen world but with it. In the Arctic, the Inuit and other indigenous peoples developed ways of life so finely tuned to ice and snow that survival became not just possible, but enduring. They read the frozen landscape as others read books, learning to notice the subtleties of wind patterns, snowdrifts, and the sound of shifting flows. Where outsiders might see only emptiness, they saw maps, guides, and stories written across the ice. One of the most remarkable examples of adaptation is the igloo, a shelter built from blocks of compacted snow. To someone unfamiliar, it seems improbable that walls of frozen water could keep out the cold. Yet the science is precise. Snow is filled with air pockets, and when shaped into a dome, those pockets act as insulation. Inside an igloo, the temperature may rise far above the freezing air outside, warmed simply by body heat and a small lamp. The material most feared by strangers, snow itself, becomes protection. The Inuit also mastered travel across frozen expanses. Sleds pulled by teams of dogs allowed journeys across miles of ice, the animals reading the terrain as much as the humans guiding them. Kayaks, light and swift, carried hunters through waters where sea ice met the open ocean. Tools and clothing were designed for efficiency. Parkas lined with fur, boots layered with skins, each element honed over centuries of experience. To live in these conditions required ingenuity, patience, and respect for the frozen architect shaping their world. In contrast, when European explorers first entered the polar regions, they often underestimated the knowledge needed to survive. The frozen seas appeared like blank spaces on maps, invitations for conquest. Expeditions set out in wooden ships, crewed by men unfamiliar with the subtle signs of ice. Some returned with harrowing tales, many never returned at all. The Franklin expedition of the 19th century is perhaps the most haunting example. Two ships, the Erebus and the Terror, set sail to chart the Northwest Passage, a sea route through the ice linking the Atlantic and Pacific. The ships became trapped in the frozen waters of Canada's Arctic, locked in by unyielding ice. For years the crew struggled, but the ice did not release them. The ships were abandoned, and the men attempted to march south across a frozen wilderness. None survived. It was not malice that defeated them, but the patient indifference of ice. Other explorers fared better, often because they learned from indigenous peoples. Roald Amundsen, the first to reach the South Pole, relied on Inuit techniques for clothing and dog sledding, recognizing that survival depended on humility as much as determination. He dressed in fur, traveled light, and listened to those who understood ice's temperament. Where others failed through arrogance, he succeeded through respect. Human encounters with ice reveal not only the physical challenges of the frozen world, but also the lessons it offers. Ice demands patience, it punishes haste, it rewards observation, humility, and adaptability. Those who approach it with reverence find ways to endure. Those who seek to conquer it outright often meet silence and loss. Even today, scientists and explorers venturing into polar regions rely on knowledge passed down through generations. They wear insulated clothing designed with the same principles as Inuit furs, travel with sleds adapted to modern needs, and read the ice with instruments as precise as the human eye once was. Though the tools have changed, the truth remains. To live with ice, one must learn its language. For people across history, ice has been teacher, shelter, and adversary. It has tested endurance, shaped culture, and demanded ingenuity. In every encounter, it has reminded humanity that survival is not a matter of force, but of harmony with the world as it is. Across the long history of Earth, ice has not always rested only at the poles or in the high mountains. There were times when it stretched far beyond its present boundaries, rolling down across continents, advancing like a tide that paused for millennia before retreating again. These were the Ice Ages, epochs when frozen water claimed a vast share of the planet, reshaping not only the land but the story of life itself. During the last great ice age, which ended only about 12,000 years ago, enormous sheets of ice covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia. These sheets were not thin crusts, but domes of frozen water 2 or 3 kilometers thick, pressing down upon the earth with unimaginable weight. Forests disappeared beneath them, mountains wore smooth beneath their grinding passage, and whole ecosystems adapted to the cold or vanished in its shadow. Yet the ice ages were not only times of absence, they were also times of creation. As the glaciers advanced, they carved basins that would later become lakes, scoured valleys that now serve as fertile farmland, and left behind deposits of soil rich with minerals ground from the rock. The very landscapes where human civilizations would later rise were prepared, in part, by the sculpting hand of ice. The cycles of glaciation were governed by subtle shifts in Earth's orbit and tilt, small changes in distance from the sun and in the angle of light. These variations, known as Milankovitch cycles, altered the distribution of sunlight, tipping the balance toward cold or warmth. Ice responded patiently, building its domes in the north, then retreating when the planet tilted back. Across hundreds of thousands of years, these rhythms repeated, marking time on a scale far beyond human reckoning. For the creatures of those eras, adaptation was a necessity. Mammoths roamed the tundra, their long hair and thick fat layers keeping them warm in endless winter. Saber-toothed cats hunted among herds of bison and horses that grazed the open plains left by retreating forests. Humans, too, moved with the ice, migrating south when glaciers advanced, following herds, learning to survive with tools, fire, and community. Ice pushed life into new patterns, and those patterns became the roots of our species' resilience. Even in the depths of the last ice age, warmth endured in pockets. Valleys sheltered by mountains remained ice-free, serving as refuges where plants and animals persisted. These sanctuaries became sources of renewal when the ice finally retreated, spreading life outward again. Ice may have pressed down upon the world, but it never extinguished its flame. When the last great glaciers melted, they released floods of water that reshaped coastlines and carved new rivers. Sea levels rose, drowning ancient land bridges. The retreat of ice opened fertile plains for farming, cleared paths for migration, and gave birth to lakes so vast they still dominate continents today. The retreat was not destruction but transformation, as landscapes shifted into the forms we now recognize. To reflect on these cycles is to be reminded of perspective. Human history, measured in centuries or millennia, is brief compared to the sweep of ice ages. Civilizations rise and fall in the pause between advances. Our earliest myths, our first languages, our first fires, all occurred in the shadow of retreating ice. And yet, through all these cycles, ice remained constant in its role. It advanced, it retreated, it shaped, and it preserved. It was not an intruder but a participant in Earth's long story, a sculptor whose work is measured in epochs rather than years. To imagine the planet beneath kilometers of frozen water is to glimpse the scale of time itself. It is to understand that change is not always sudden, and that the world we inhabit was not given in a single form. It has been carved, erased, and redrawn by the silent hand of ice, over and over, across the vast canvas of deep time. High above the clouds, where air thins and silence deepens, mountains cradle their own frozen guardians. Unlike the vast sheets of the poles, these glaciers are smaller, yet their influence reaches far beyond their icy walls. Perched upon ridges and nestled within valleys, mountain glaciers feed rivers that wind for thousands of kilometers, sustaining forests, farms, and cities far below. In the Himalayas, the third pole, immense glaciers stretch across slopes, their frozen bodies holding more fresh water than any place outside the Arctic and Antarctic. From these heights, rivers like the Ganges, the Yangtze, and the Mekong begin their journeys. Billions of lives depend on the slow release of meltwater from the ice above. What seems distant and untouchable in the mountains is, in truth, woven into the daily rhythms of villages and cities far downstream. Each drop that nourishes a field of rice or spins a millstone may once have been locked in frozen silence on a Himalayan ridge. The Andes, too, carry their hidden reservoirs. In Peru and Bolivia, small communities rely on glacial streams for drinking water, crops, and livestock. Without the ice, the dry seasons would stretch too long, rivers would dwindle, and life would become more precarious. Even in the Alps of Europe, though the glaciers are smaller, they have shaped culture for centuries. Their melt feeds vineyards along river valleys, supports hydroelectric power, and fills lakes where people gather for rest. To stand before a mountain glacier is to witness a paradox. From afar, it seems solid and permanent, yet up close you hear water dripping, streams trickling, blocks breaking with a deep crack. These frozen rivers are always in motion, always shifting, though the changes are too slow for an impatient eye. They remind us that endurance is not stillness, but continual adaptation. The color of mountain ice carries its own beauty. Where it compacts most densely, air is pressed out, leaving only the crystal lattice. Sunlight passes deep within, and emerges as radiant blue, a shade so vivid it seems to glow from within. To walk through an ice cave beneath a glacier is to be bathed in this light, as though standing inside a living jewel. The experience is humbling, stone above, ice around, water beneath, all woven together in fragile balance. Glaciers in the mountains also record history, though on smaller scales than their polar cousins. Dust from distant deserts, ash from eruptions, soot from fires, all settle upon the ice, forming dark layers within. When the ice melts, those layers re-emerge, tiny reminders that no place is truly isolated. Even the highest peaks are connected to valleys and plains far away. For those who live near them, glaciers are not abstractions but neighbors. They appear on the horizon each morning, glowing pink in the rising sun, or stand silent under starlight. Festivals mark the blessing of meltwater. Prayers are offered for snow to fall upon the peaks. Songs are sung in gratitude for rivers born of ice. In this way, mountains become bridges between the heavens and human lives. They're glaciers, the quiet channels through which sustenance flows. To think of mountain ice is to remember that what appears remote is in fact intimate. The frozen ridges and valleys above are part of the bread we eat, the water we drink, the energy we use. They are reminders that all things are connected, that the highest places serve the lowest, and that endurance is often hidden in forms we take for granted. Beneath the great sheets of Antarctic ice, in places untouched by sunlight for millions of years, rivers flow and lakes lie waiting. It may seem impossible that water could remain liquid beneath such weight and cold, yet the pressure of the ice above, combined with warmth rising from Earth's interior, creates hidden worlds beneath the frozen surface. These places are among the most secretive landscapes on our planet, sealed beneath kilometers of ice, shielded from the eyes of all but the most patient explorers. Lake Vostok, one of the largest of these hidden reservoirs, rests beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice. For as long as there have been forests, mountains, and oceans, this lake has remained isolated, its waters cut off from the surface. Scientists believe that within it, life may exist, microbes adapted to darkness, pressure, and silence. If so, these organisms are survivors of a world untouched by human influence, carrying forward lineages older than memory. Other subglacial lakes and rivers connect beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, forming an unseen plumbing system across the frozen continent. Sensors reveal pulses of water moving from one basin to another, filling and draining as though the ice itself were breathing. These hidden flows may lubricate the base of glaciers, hastening their movement, or serve as reservoirs of life yet undiscovered. What lies beneath is both a mystery and a promise, a reminder that the frozen world is never as still as it seems. The existence of these hidden waters changes how we see ice. It is not merely a barrier, pressing downward and sealing away the land. It is also a guardian, preserving ecosystems from the chaos of the surface. Beneath the crushing weight of kilometers of ice, delicate balances endure, life thriving in dark silence, rivers moving through unseen channels, worlds waiting quietly until we learn to listen. Scientists approach these places with care. Drilling into a subglacial lake is not simply an act of exploration but of respect. To open such an environment risks contamination, risks altering something that has remained untouched since before our species existed. And so, probes are lowered carefully, instruments sterilized, as researchers attempt to observe without disturbing. The goal is to witness, not to conquer. to let the frozen veil lift gently, without tearing. There is a meditative lesson in these hidden rivers. Much of what shapes our world is unseen. Beneath the surfaces we walk upon, forces move in silence. Currents flow beyond our awareness. Life endures where we might least expect it. Ice teaches us that invisibility does not mean absence, that what is hidden may still be vibrant and full of meaning. As you listen, you might imagine those secret lakes, dark and still, waiting beneath kilometers of frozen cover. You may picture currents flowing quietly in the shadows, carrying minerals, carrying heat, carrying the potential of life. Just as they remain unseen yet real, so too your own inner rhythms continue, whether or not you attend to them. Breathing, heartbeat, thought, all move quietly beneath the surface of rest. If sleep comes to you now, it is no different from the hidden water beneath ice, silent, steady, nourishing in ways unseen. And if sleep has not yet come, that too is natural, for like these subglacial currents, it moves on its own time, finding its path gently. These invisible rivers remind us that there is more to the world than what lies before our eyes. Beneath ice, beneath stone, beneath our own waking awareness, life continues, cycles unfold, time flows. To trust in that unseen continuity is to find calm, even in the dark. When sunlight strikes the earth, not all of it is absorbed. Some of it bounces back, sent outward again into space. This reflection is part of the planet's delicate balance, a balance that decides how warm or cool the world becomes. Ice, with its bright surface, is one of the most effective mirrors on Earth. To look at the polar regions from above is to see vast expanses of white light, gleaming shields that turn away the sun's energy. This reflective quality is called albedo, from the Latin for whiteness. Snow and ice reflect up to 90% of incoming sunlight, returning it to the sky. In contrast, dark oceans and forests absorb most of the energy they receive. The difference is profound. Where ice covers the sea, much of the sun's warmth is sent away. Where ice retreats and dark water emerges, more heat is captured and the balance shifts. In this way, ice is not only a sculptor of landscapes but also a regulator of climate, a quiet manager of the planet's energy. Imagine a frozen plain under the low winter Sunday light stretches across it, scattering in all directions, dazzling the eye with brilliance. In such moments, the ice seems almost luminous, glowing not from within, but from its power to give back the light it receives. This gift is not small. Without these reflective surfaces, Earth would warm more quickly, seas would rise more rapidly, and storms would carry greater force. Ice protects not only itself but everything that lives beneath its shield. Even the snow that falls in our own backyards plays a part. A fresh snowfall brightens the landscape and cools the air around it, reflecting warmth upward. Farmers have long noticed that snow covering fields in winter helps preserve soil moisture, shielding the ground and setting the stage for growth in spring. The albedo effect works not only at the scale of continents but also in the quiet intimacy of fields, gardens, and forests. And yet, this role as a mirror is fragile. When ice melts, it reveals darker surfaces, water, rock, or soil, that absorb more sunlight. This creates a cycle. Less ice leads to more absorption, which leads to more melting. Scientists call this a feedback loop, but in simpler words it is a reminder of how small changes can grow larger, how one shift can ripple outward into many. There is a quiet lesson here. Just as ice reflects light, so too do our actions reflect outward, shaping more than we may first see. A word of kindness, a choice of patience, a pause for thought. These are like bright surfaces, reflecting warmth in ways that extend beyond the moment. And just as the loss of reflection can tip the balance of climate, so too the absence of care can tip the balance of human connection. To think of ice as a mirror is to think of it not only as a physical presence but as a symbol of balance. It does not keep the light for itself, it returns it. It does not seek recognition, but its absence is felt everywhere. In a sense, ice teaches generosity, the act of receiving and then giving back, of holding a place in the great cycle without claiming it as its own. When next you see the shimmer of snow in sunlight, or the gleam of frost on a window pane, you are seeing this mirror at work. A quiet partner in the planet's balance, returning warmth to the sky, preserving coolness below. In its brightness lies protection, and in its reflection lies resilience. Where ice meets the ocean, the world becomes fluid and uncertain. These edges are neither entirely solid nor fully liquid, but shifting frontiers where glaciers release their weight into the sea. Here, massive shelves of floating ice extend outward from the land, their surfaces cracked and ridged, like the pages of a book opened and left under strain. They are beautiful and fragile, immense platforms that appear steady, yet are always in the process of change. These ice shelves serve as barriers, slowing the flow of glaciers behind them. Anchored to rocky coastlines, they act like gates, holding back the frozen rivers that descend from the heart of Antarctica and Greenland. When they fracture, when they break apart and drift away, the gates open, the glaciers behind them accelerate, and the land's frozen storehouse pours more quickly into the sea. It is a reminder that the strength of ice often rests upon its edges, that what happens at the margins decides the fate of the whole. From time to time, great slabs of ice carve into the ocean, breaking with a sound like thunder. These newly born icebergs, some larger than cities, drift into the currents, carried far from the places where they began. Their surfaces shine with shades of blue and white, sculpted into towers and arches by waves and wind. Some will last for years before melting away completely, wandering through oceans as monuments to the slow separation of land and sea. To witness such an event is to feel awe at both the grandeur and fragility of the frozen world. The collapse of a single ice shelf can reshape coastlines, alter ecosystems, and shift global currents. Yet when the moment arrives, it is sudden, as though centuries of pressure and waiting find release in a single fracture. The edges hold their tension silently, until silence gives way to sound, and the sea carries away the fragments. Life, too, adapts to these boundaries. Penguins gather on ice shelves to breed, seals haul themselves onto floes to rest, and krill graze on algae clinging to the underside of sea ice. The fragile meeting of ice and ocean is not just a zone of collapse but a zone of life, where ecosystems thrive in the margins. Here, as elsewhere, the line between fragility and abundance is narrow. There is something deeply symbolic in these edges. They remind us that change often begins at the margins, not the center. Just as an ice shelf fractures at its outermost reach, so too do transformations in human life often begin at the boundaries, moments of uncertainty, transitions between stability and the unknown. What breaks at the edge can ripple inward, reshaping the whole. And yet, fragility does not mean weakness alone. These floating shelves endure immense forces for centuries, resisting storms and tides. Their collapse is not a failure but part of a cycle. Ice that drifts away will eventually melt, returning to the ocean, rising again into clouds, and falling once more as snow. In this way, even the most dramatic fracture belongs to a larger continuity. When you imagine these fragile edges, think of them not only as boundaries of ice but as thresholds of transformation. They are places where stillness meets movement, where solidity meets fluidity, where endings become beginnings. In the thunder of carving ice and the silence that follows, we hear the rhythm of change, a reminder that even the most enduring forms are shaped by time, and that fragility itself can be a gateway to renewal. When we hear the word desert, the image that often comes to mind is one of sand and heat, a landscape shimmering under the weight of a relentless Sunday. Yet deserts are not defined by temperature, but by scarcity of precipitation. By that measure, one of the greatest deserts on Earth is also one of the coldest, Antarctica. It stretches across a continent twice the size of Australia, holding nearly 70% of the world's fresh water in its ice, and yet it is one of the driest places on the planet. Most of Antarctica receives less than 50 millimeters of precipitation a year, less than many of the world's warmest deserts. Snow does fall, but rarely, and when it does, the flakes may remain for centuries, compacting under their own weight until they become part of the great ice sheet. The cold is so intense that the air holds little moisture, and storms that elsewhere would bring torrents of rain arrive here as thin veils of snow, drifting lightly, barely enough to cover the surface. This paradox that a continent buried beneath kilometers of ice is, in truth, a desert, reminds us that appearances can mislead. To stand upon the Antarctic plateau is to stand in a place of extremes. The ice stretches in every direction, blinding in its brightness, yet the air is dry, so dry that lips crack, skin burns, and the moisture of breath freezes in seconds. Water is everywhere and nowhere at once. Life persists even here, though only in narrow margins. Along the coasts, penguins gather where the sea provides food, and seals haul themselves onto the ice to rest. Inland, however, the emptiness dominates. A few microbes cling to survival in the thin soils of the McMurdo dry valleys, a region so barren that scientists study it as an analogue for Mars. Here, glaciers spill into valleys without ever fully melting, and frozen lakes remain sealed beneath layers of ice, undisturbed for millennia. The frozen desert teaches a kind of humility. It shows us that abundance in one form does not guarantee abundance in another. Fresh water is locked away, inaccessible to all but those with the tools to melt it. Precipitation is nearly absent, making growth impossible for plants and animals accustomed to renewal. To thrive here requires strategies of patience and endurance that far exceed those needed in more generous climates. And yet, within this desert, beauty persists. The air is so clear that mountains hundreds of kilometers away seem close enough to touch. The night sky stretches vast and unbroken, the aurora australis painting ribbons of green and red across the black. The silence is profound, not merely an absence of sound but a presence of stillness, as though the world itself pauses here, holding its breath. The paradox of the frozen desert also speaks to the broader truth of ice itself. It can be both barrier and refuge, abundant and scarce, eternal and fragile. Its nature shifts depending on how we approach it, what we seek, and what we are prepared to see. To some, Antarctica is an inhospitable void, a place of peril and emptiness. To others, it is a living archive, a place where time has slowed and preserved the story of Earth in layers of snow and ice. To reflect on this desert of frozen water is to be reminded that life often hides in contradiction. Places that seem empty may be full of meaning, and places that appear rich may conceal scarcity. Ice holds this duality with quiet grace, teaching us that the world cannot be reduced to simple categories of plenty or lack. In the end, Antarctica stands as a desert not in spite of its ice, but because of it. It is a paradox etched into the planet itself, a reminder that truth often lives in contrasts, and that even in the most extreme silence, the world continues to write its story in frost and light. For millions of years, ice has moved in cycles, advancing and retreating in rhythm with the tilt of the Earth, the pull of its orbit, and the long patterns of climate. These cycles are written in layers of glaciers and in the fossils of plants that once grew where now there is snow. They remind us that change is part of the frozen world, that ice has never been entirely fixed, but always in motion, expanding, withdrawing, breathing with the planet itself. In the past, these changes unfolded slowly, too slowly for any single lifetime to perceive. An ice sheet might grow across a continent over tens of thousands of years, then retreat just as gradually, leaving behind valleys, lakes, and plains. Generations of animals would rise and fall within the span of a single shift. To them, the advance of ice was less an event than a condition of existence, something that simply was. Today, however, the pace feels different. Edges that once shifted imperceptibly are now moving more quickly. Glaciers that seemed eternal are thinning, their surfaces lowering year by year. In the Arctic, sea ice that once blanketed the ocean through summer now retreats, exposing dark water that drinks in heat. These changes are not the work of millennia but of decades, visible even within a single human life. The whispers of change can be subtle. A stream running earlier in the spring, a glacier's terminus a little farther back than before, the return of migratory animals delayed or altered. Yet taken together, they form a chorus, reminding us that the frozen world responds not only to distant cycles of orbit and tilt, but also to the choices made by those who inhabit the Earth today. Still, ice does not speak in alarm. Its language is patient, even as it changes. A calving glacier, though dramatic, is only one step in a long sequence. A shrinking sheet is still immense, holding water enough to raise seas around the world. The frozen world reminds us that scale matters, that what seems fragile can still hold immense presence, and that even in retreat, ice remains one of the most powerful forces shaping Earth. To reflect on these whispers is to sit with complexity. Ice is both ancient and immediate, both steady and shifting. Its cycles remind us that change is natural, but its pace today reminds us that influence matters. The balance is delicate, and within it we can learn humility, that we are not outside of nature's rhythms, but part of them. There is also perspective in these changes. Even as glaciers retreat, they reveal land that has been hidden for thousands of years, exposing new ecosystems, new possibilities, new reminders of how landscapes transform. Ice teaches not only about loss, but also about renewal. What recedes does not vanish from the story. It writes new chapters in forms we may not yet understand. As you imagine these whispers of change, think of them not as shouts demanding urgency, but as gentle voices reminding us of continuity. Ice shifts, as it always has, though the tempo has quickened. It tells us that the world is alive, dynamic, never still, and within that knowledge there is calm to be found. For just as ice breathes with cycles of advance and retreat, so too do we live by rhythms. Our lives move in seasons of growth and seasons of rest, of expansion and contraction. Change is not a disruption but a pattern, and to recognize it is to accept our place within the larger flow. When winter stretches across temperate lands, rivers and lakes surrender to stillness. What once flowed freely, carrying boats and reflecting skies, grows quiet under a layer of ice. This transformation is temporary, yet it reshapes entire landscapes, altering the lives of people, animals, and plants that depend on these waters. In this way, even outside the polar regions, ice leaves its mark, not in vast sheets that endure for millennia, but in cycles that return each year like a familiar refrain. In northern Europe, canals and rivers often freeze in the heart of winter, creating new pathways across the land. Where boats once traveled, people lace their skates and glide across the surface, moving gracefully where water once flowed. The Dutch, for centuries, have celebrated winters cold enough to freeze canals, turning villages into arenas of play and gathering. Markets spring up on frozen lakes, bonfires glow upon the ice, and the community gathers on surfaces that, in warmer months, separate them. For a season, the frozen river is not a barrier but a bridge. Across the great expanses of North America, lakes transform into frozen plains where traditions of fishing continue in new forms. Ice fishing huts appear in rows, their windows glowing with lamplight against the pale snow. Beneath the thick crust, life continues, fish moving slowly, waiting in the dim light that filters through. Above, patience is practiced in warmth and laughter, as generations share stories in shelters resting lightly upon the ice. The season is harsh, yet it offers moments of connection, of quiet endurance softened by companionship. In Siberia, lakes freeze so deeply that vehicles cross their surfaces, roads forming where no road exists in summer. Trucks rumble across the ice of Lake Baikal, the deepest lake in the world, their paths marked by fissures that reveal the blue depths below. This practice carries risk, for ice is never entirely predictable. Yet for centuries it has provided a vital link in winter, shortening distances and allowing trade where otherwise only isolation would remain. The ice becomes a fleeting highway, a reminder of how frozen water can both hinder and enable human life. For animals, these frozen waterways bring changes as well. Beavers remain in their lodges, sealed beneath ice yet connected to water through underwater entrances. Fish slow their movements, conserving energy in the chill. Birds that rely on open water migrate south, returning when the thaw comes. The ice dictates rhythms, directing life in ways both subtle and profound. There is beauty in this annual transformation. Snow settling on a frozen lake creates a silence unlike any other, muffling sound until even footsteps feel hushed. A river stopped in winter reflects the pale sky, holding the world in stillness. In these moments, ice offers not only a change in landscape, but also a change in perception, reminding us of the quiet strength found in pause. Traditions born of frozen rivers and lakes are also traditions of patience. Skaters wait for the first safe ice. Families prepare for fishing season. Travelers trust the thickness beneath their feet. These acts carry lessons that strength can be found in fragility, that beauty can emerge from limitation, that stillness has its place in the rhythm of life. To witness a river frozen, to walk upon a lake sealed in ice, is to step into a pause within time itself. The water beneath continues to flow, unseen, but for a while the surface belongs to another world. Ice does not erase the river. It holds it gently in place, reminding us that movement can rest, that continuity can include stillness. Cold is a sensation we know in our skin, the sharp bite of winter air on cheeks, the numbness in fingertips, the shiver that moves through the body when warmth is lost. Yet in physics, cold is not a substance or a force. It is not something that flows into us, but rather the absence of something else, the absence of heat. To understand ice fully, we must linger for a moment on the nature of temperature itself. Every atom and molecule in the universe is in motion, vibrating, spinning, colliding with its neighbors. Heat is this movement. The faster the motion, the warmer the substance feels. When molecules slow, their vibrations weaken, and the temperature falls. Cold, then, is simply the slowing of this dance, a gradual quieting of movement until stillness approaches. Ice sits partway along this spectrum. At 0 degrees Celsius, water molecules lock into their crystalline lattice, no longer able to slip past one another as in the liquid state, but they do not stop entirely. Even within solid ice, atoms vibrate faintly, a reminder that motion persists as long as heat remains. There is, in theory, a point at which motion ceases altogether. Scientists call it absolute zero, a temperature of -273.15 degrees Celsius. At this boundary, molecules would rest completely, their movements halted, their energy emptied into silence. In practice, absolute zero is unreachable, for even as we approach it, traces of motion linger. Laboratories have cooled atoms to within a fraction of a degree above this threshold, creating states of matter that behave in strange and beautiful ways, but the perfect stillness remains just beyond our reach. To imagine absolute zero is to imagine a world where time itself feels paused, where no vibration disturbs the lattice, where energy sinks into a silence deeper than anything we have ever known. It is a reminder that what we call cold is not an external thing, but a scale of motion, a measure of how lively or subdued the microscopic world is at any moment. In this light, ice is revealed as a stage of slowing, not an end. It is water's pause, but not its silence. It is a state where molecules still quiver faintly, but in harmony, joined in a repeating pattern that holds its form. Ice is not the death of movement, but a slower rhythm, a steadying of the restless dance. This perspective changes how we feel about the cold around us. To shiver in winter is not to be invaded by cold, but to lose heat, to feel the body's molecules slowing as they give their energy to the air. To warm by a fire is to reclaim motion, to let molecules dance more freely again. We are not separate from the physics of cold, we live within it, part of the same spectrum as the ice that forms on ponds and windows. There is poetry in this understanding. Cold is not an adversary, but a reminder of balance, a measure of how energy flows from one place to another. Ice, as part of this continuum, becomes not just frozen water but a lesson in motion and stillness. It teaches that quiet is not absence, but presence in another form. To think of cold in this way is to see the frozen world differently, not as a void, but as a slowed song, not as emptiness, but as patience embodied. And perhaps, in recognizing that slowing is part of nature's rhythm, we may find acceptance in our own cycles of rest, moments when our pace lessens, when our movements soften, when stillness is not failure but another kind of perfection. Light and ice have a relationship unlike any other. When sunlight touches frozen water, the result is not simply brightness but transformation. Rays bend, scatter, and sink into depths, returning in shades of blue, silver, and white. To walk among snowfields or stand beside a glacier is to see light reshaped, softened and amplified at once, as though ice were both lens and canvas. Fresh snow glitters under the sun because each flake is a crystal, its many faces reflecting light in countless directions. A snowy meadow sparkles because millions of mirrors turn toward the sky at once. The brilliance can be overwhelming, enough to dazzle the eyes, yet it is made of nothing more than the repetition of tiny crystalline shapes, each scattering a fraction of the day's radiance. Glaciers reveal another side of this relationship. Where the ice is thickest and most compact, air is pressed out, leaving clear crystalline walls. Sunlight travels into this solid mass and emerges as a vivid blue glow. The red and yellow wavelengths are absorbed, while the shorter blue waves remain, painting the frozen depths with a color that seems alive from within. To stand at the mouth of an ice cave and see the chamber bathed in turquoise light is to step into a world where illumination feels almost liquid, as though the ice itself were breathing color. Light also shapes ice in subtler ways. On the surface of glaciers, grains of snow absorb energy differently depending on their size and shape. Some melt faster, deepening into small hollows called sun cups. Over time, these shallow basins sculpt intricate patterns, landscapes within landscapes, created simply by light touching ice unevenly. Even in stillness, light continues to carve. In polar regions, the interplay of sun and ice defines entire seasons. During summer, when the sun circles the horizon and never fully sets, the ice gleams with golden light, stretching shadows across endless plains. In winter, when the sun disappears, the ice reflects the aurora, ribbons of green and violet streaming overhead, mirrored in frozen seas below. The surface becomes a stage for celestial displays, each color magnified by the clarity of the cold. The meeting of ice and light is not only a spectacle but a reminder of perspective. Light itself is invisible until it strikes something. Ice gives it form, scattering it into sparkles, bending it into blue, painting it across surfaces of frozen water. Without ice, much of this beauty would remain unseen. The frozen world teaches us that even the most ordinary elements, sunlight and water, can create wonder when they meet in a certain way. This meeting also carries practical significance. In regions where ice is bright and reflective, the albedo effect protects the Earth from warming too quickly. When the brightness fades, when dark water replaces shining flows, the planet absorbs more heat. In this way, the beauty of ice and light is not only aesthetic but essential. Perhaps this is why humans have long felt reverence for frozen landscapes illuminated by the sunday. Artists have painted glaciers glowing under moonlight, poets have written of snow sparkling like diamonds, and explorers have described the strange turquoise of crevasses as though they had glimpsed another world. Ice transforms light into memory, giving it weight and permanence where otherwise it might have passed unnoticed. Light enters ice, and ice returns it altered, enriched, magnified. In this exchange, we see a kind of dialogue between two of nature's simplest elements, a dialogue that creates beauty greater than either could alone. To stand within this dialogue is to feel both small and privileged, a witness to one of Earth's quietest yet most profound collaborations. Beneath the surfaces of glaciers, where meltwater carves hidden passages, lie chambers of extraordinary beauty. These are the ice caves, fleeting sanctuaries sculpted from frozen water and lit by the play of light through crystalline walls. To enter one is to step into a place that feels less like landscape and more like architecture, as though the earth itself had built cathedrals of ice, quiet and sacred. The ceilings rise in sweeping curves, carved not by human hands but by the steady work of melting and refreezing. Walls shine with blue and turquoise hues, colors created as sunlight filters through thick ice and absorbs all but the shortest wavelengths. Sometimes the surfaces ripple as though frozen waves had been captured mid-motion. At other times they hang in delicate icicles, long chandeliers shimmering in the dim light. Beneath the feet, meltwater streams whisper their way across the floor, echoing faintly in chambers that feel as vast as concert halls. These caves are never permanent. A single season may erase them, as warmth reshapes the glacier and channels shift. Each is unique, a once formed, once lost marvel. Unlike stone caverns that endure for millions of years, ice caves remind us that beauty need not be eternal to be profound. Their transience deepens their wonder, for to step within one is to glimpse a moment that will never exist again in quite the same form. In Iceland, ice caves form each winter within the Great Vatnajökull Glacier, Europe's largest. Guides lead visitors through their shimmering halls, warning that the walls may not be the same next year, or even next month. In Alaska, vast tunnels open in the Mendenhall Glacier, glowing with ethereal blue light, only to collapse when summer warmth advances. Across the Andes, the Alps, and the Himalayas, similar sanctuaries appear and vanish, built and unbuilt by the rhythm of meltwater. Everywhere they arise, they serve as reminders that time is always carving, always renewing. The science of their creation is simple, though the results appear miraculous. Water, warmed by air or geothermal heat, seeps into crevasses, melting passages within the ice. The liquid flows downward, widening its channel, carrying heat deeper into the glacier. When temperatures fall, these channels refreeze in places, creating arches and layers that strengthen the surrounding walls. Over years, networks form, some large enough to walk through, others hidden, silent corridors, unseen by any human eye. For those who step inside, however, the science fades behind sensation. The air is cool and damp, filled with the scent of mineral water. Light bends into colors that seem otherworldly, surrounding the visitor in hues rarely seen in the natural world. Every surface glows softly, as though illuminated from within. Sound becomes sharper, echoing from frozen walls, every footstep magnified, every whisper stretching outward into silence. To linger here is to feel both enclosed and expanded, as though entering a space meant for reflection. The comparison to cathedrals is not mere poetry. The arched ceilings, the sense of scale, the reverence the space inspires, all evoke the architecture of places built for contemplation. Yet these sanctuaries are built by no hand, planned by no architect. They arise from the meeting of water and time, from the interplay of flow and freeze. Their beauty is unintentional, and perhaps because of this, it feels purer, untouched by ambition. When we think of ice as an architect, the cathedrals it builds remind us that creation need not seek permanence to hold meaning. A single cave, lasting one winter, can stir awe that lingers for a lifetime. Transience is not weakness, it is part of the beauty itself. Just as snowflakes fall and vanish, just as rivers freeze and thaw, these frozen sanctuaries exist precisely because they will not endure. To reflect on such places is to understand that not all wonder can be held. Some must be experienced in passing, carried not in stone, but in memory. Ice teaches us that impermanence can be sacred, and that the most delicate creations can inspire the deepest reverence. Long before science revealed the crystalline structures of snowflakes or the vast cycles of glaciation, people gazed upon ice and wove it into stories. Myths and legends carried explanations for its presence, its dangers, and its power to transform the world. These tales were more than imagination. They were a way of honoring the mystery of a force that could both sustain and end lives, that could reshape landscapes with patience and silence. Ice, to ancient peoples, was never inert. It was alive with meaning. In the far north, the Norse spoke of Jotunheimr, the land of the frost giants, a realm of formidable beings who embodied the strength and cruelty of winter. For them, ice was not only a physical presence but also a character in the cosmic story, a force that shaped gods and men alike. From the meeting of fire and ice in the yawning void of Ginnungagap, the first giant was said to emerge, and with him the unfolding of the world. In such myths, frozen water was not an afterthought of creation but its beginning. Across Siberia, stories told of endless winters, of spirits who dwelled in snowstorms and shadows, watching travelers and guiding or misleading them across frozen steppes. Some legends described frost as a living entity, able to slip into homes through cracks, touching walls and windows with icy fingers. These tales served not only as warnings but as acknowledgments that cold was a power to be respected, a presence that entered daily life whether welcomed or not. For the Inuit, who lived with ice intimately, myths often blurred the line between human and nature. Stories spoke of hunters who became seals, or of women who transformed into whales, slipping beneath the ice to join the life below. In these tales, frozen seas were not barriers but thresholds, gateways to another world where beings could pass between forms. The ice itself was part of the boundary, a thin, shimmering veil separating one existence from another. In Japan, the goddess Yuki Onna, the snow woman, was said to drift through storms, her pale beauty matched only by her chill touch. She appeared on nights of heavy snowfall, her presence as transient as the weather itself. Some stories described her as merciless, freezing travelers who crossed her path. Others portrayed her as lonely, longing for companionship in the vast silence of winter. Through her, ice became not only danger but also longing, a reflection of human emotion written upon the landscape. Even in warmer cultures, tales of frozen realms found their place. Ancient Greek writers described mountains of eternal snow, remote and untouchable, where gods withdrew from the world. Medieval travelers returned with stories of rivers that stood still in the lands of the north, marveling at the strangeness of frozen water, unable to conceive of it as natural. To them, it was enchantment, a spell cast by distant, mysterious forces. These myths endure not because they explain ice in the way science now does, but because they capture something equally true, that frozen landscapes evoke awe. They remind us that ice is not merely water at rest, but a presence that shapes how we see ourselves, our fears, and our hopes. It is the canvas upon which people painted their deepest emotions: fear of loss, reverence for endurance, longing for beauty, respect for forces greater than themselves. When we carry these stories forward, we are not only remembering legends, we are honoring the human impulse to look at the world with wonder. To see a frost giant or a snow goddess in the drifting flakes is to say that ice is not just cold, it is alive with meaning. In this sense, myth and science are not opposites. Both are ways of listening, of paying attention, of giving shape to the silence of frozen worlds. Ice holds memory not only in bubbles of ancient air, but in stories told by firelight, carried across generations. To reflect on these myths is to see that humans, too, are part of the frozen architect's story, not only through survival, but through imagination. To stand before a glacier is to stand before time made visible. The frozen mass stretches downward from mountain peaks, flowing as a river would, yet so slowly that its movement seems imperceptible. Stones embedded within it scrape the valley floor, leaving grooves that record centuries of steady pressure. What seems still is in fact always advancing, always shaping, always carrying the weight of ages forward. Ice is a traveler through time, moving at a pace so deliberate that our brief lives are but moments against its journey. A human life is measured in decades. We recall the winters of childhood, the storms of youth, the long summers that followed. A glacier, by contrast, holds thousands of such seasons in its body. Layers of snow, compressed into ice, stack upon one another until the years blur into one continuous flow. The ice that touches the valley floor may have fallen as snow long before written language, long before cities rose, long before our ancestors even knew the world's shape. To touch it is to touch time itself, condensed and enduring. The scale humbles us. We build monuments and call them permanent, yet ice has watched civilizations rise and fade. The frozen tongues of Greenland or Antarctica have seen more history than any human archive, not because they record events directly, but because they endure across the span of them. The glacier moves, the world changes, and yet its pace remains steady, unhurried by the urgency of human clocks. Even the speed of ice has its variety. Some glaciers advance a few centimeters a day, so slow that a single rock might take centuries to travel from mountain peak to valley floor. Others, known as surge glaciers, may suddenly accelerate, sliding forward tens of meters in a single day, a reminder that even patient forces can hold moments of surprising urgency. Yet even in these bursts, the glacier's timescale remains vast compared to our own. What is a rush for ice is still a crawl for us. The patience of glaciers offers lessons that reach beyond geology. They teach that change does not always arrive with noise or spectacle. Sometimes it comes through quiet persistence, through the accumulation of small shifts that, over time, remake the world. A valley carved by ice was not created in an instant, but by countless days of pressure, countless nights of freezing and thawing. In this way, ice reflects a truth about life itself, that the most profound transformations often unfold slowly, unnoticed, until the landscape has already changed. There is also comfort in this slowness. In a world where time often feels compressed, where tasks and expectations seem to multiply without pause, glaciers remind us of another rhythm. They embody endurance, continuity, patience. They invite us to step out of urgency and into a broader perspective, where years are brushstrokes on a canvas stretching far beyond our view. And yet, glaciers are not eternal. They recede, they vanish, they return again in cycles longer than we can fully comprehend. Their presence is both timeless and temporary, enduring yet fragile. This paradox deepens their meaning. To look upon a glacier is to see both permanence and impermanence at once, to be reminded that time itself holds both qualities, that nothing lasts forever, and yet nothing is ever truly lost. When you think of ice and time, you are thinking of patience in its purest form. You are thinking of a river that flows not in days but in centuries, not in hours but in ages. You are thinking of endurance so steady it outlasts memory, and yet so delicate it can vanish within a single warming season. Ice shows us that time is not a single rhythm but many, and that within those rhythms lies the story of our world. There was a time, long before humans walked the earth, when ice may have claimed nearly the entire planet. Scientists call this possibility snowball Earth, an era hundreds of millions of years ago when glaciers stretched to the equator, when oceans lay sealed beneath frozen crusts, when the world itself became a vast sphere of white and blue. Though debate continues about the exact extent, evidence carved into rocks suggests that ice once reached far beyond the poles, reshaping Earth on a scale almost beyond imagination. To picture this world is to see oceans silent beneath thick ice, continents buried, and the equatorial seas frozen like the Arctic is today. Life, fragile and simple, endured only in pockets, microbes clustered around volcanic vents in the sea, or sheltered in thin layers of liquid water beneath the ice. Sunlight, reflected by the planet's white surface, would have struggled to warm the Earth, reinforcing the cold. The cycle of reflection and chill may have locked the planet into its frozen state for millions of years. Yet, even in such extremes, life did not vanish. The resilience of microorganisms allowed Earth to continue breathing, waiting for a shift. Volcanoes, releasing carbon dioxide into the air, slowly thickened the atmosphere, trapping more heat. Over time, the greenhouse effect tipped the balance. The frozen grip loosened, ice retreated, and the planet warmed. When the thaw came, it was dramatic. Rapid melting poured fresh water into the seas, altering chemistry, fueling bursts of evolution. In the aftermath of global ice, new life flourished. Some scientists believe that these frozen ages may have set the stage for the rise of more complex organisms, eventually making possible the diversity of life we know today. The idea of a snowball Earth reminds us of the planet's capacity for transformation. We often think of Earth as stable, its conditions constant and familiar, yet its history is full of extremes. From near-total freezing to periods of greenhouse warmth, the pendulum of climate has swung across eons, carrying life along with it. To know this is to realize that what feels permanent in our lives, the shape of continents, the climate we inhabit, is only one frame in a much longer story. There is a strange calm in thinking of a world covered in ice. Imagine standing upon such a surface. No fields, no forests, no rivers, only white stretching in every direction. The horizon would blur with the sky, light scattering in silvery brilliance, silence pressing from all sides. The planet would feel paused, caught in a long breath held against time. And yet beneath the ice, water still moved. Volcanoes still erupted. The deep earth still pulsed with heat. even in the quietest freeze, the planet remained alive. For us, these frozen ages serve as reminders that change is not always gentle, nor always predictable. They show that Earth has endured transformations more extreme than any we face today, and that life, however fragile, has ways of surviving even the harshest of climates. The story of Snowball Earth is not one of extinction, but of endurance, of waiting in silence until conditions allow growth again. When we reflect on such a world, we see that ice is not only sculptor of landscapes, but of possibility. It has tested life, and through that testing life has grown stronger, more varied, more adaptable. Ice has been both trial and catalyst, reminding us that difficulty can give rise to resilience, that silence can give way to song, and that even a frozen planet can one day awaken. When snow drifts from the sky, it carries with it one of nature's quietest wonders, the snowflake. Each flake, so small and fragile it melts at the warmth of a breath, is at the same time a masterpiece of geometry. Billions fall in every storm, blanketing fields, forests and cities. No two are exactly the same, and yet each follows the same hidden logic, the lattice of ice repeating its six-fold symmetry in endless variations. The birth of a snowflake begins with a speck, often a particle of dust, ash, or pollen. Water vapor condenses around it, forming a droplet that freezes into the first crystal. As this seed falls through the air, water vapor continues to cling to its edges, extending outward in branching arms. The exact pattern depends on the conditions of the atmosphere, the humidity, the temperature, the pressure. Slight shifts alter the growth, causing branches to lengthen or shorten, tips to split, arms to curve. The result is a design unique to the path each flake has taken. This individuality has fascinated humans for centuries. The Japanese scholar Ukichiro Nakaya once described snowflakes as letters sent from heaven, each one carrying a message written in frozen water. With microscopes, scientists have catalogued thousands of forms, star-shaped crystals, plates, needles, columns, dendrites, all variations of the same hexagonal foundation. What unites them is the symmetry born of water's molecular bonds, the same bonds that allow ice to float and glaciers to grow. When these countless crystals gather, they create landscapes of astonishing beauty. A single flake may vanish in an instant, but together, billions transform the world. A grey street becomes luminous, a forest is hushed under white, and even the most familiar paths feel altered, softened, renewed. Snow is the voice of winter, not loud, but insistent, covering noise with stillness, transforming sight with brightness. For animals, snow offers more than beauty. Beneath its layers lies warmth. The snowpack, filled with air, insulates the ground below. Small mammals burrow into it, creating hidden tunnels where temperatures remain steady even as the air above falls dangerously low. In this way, snowflakes, fragile, fleeting, melting at the touch, combine to create shelter that sustains entire ecosystems through the harshest months. There is symbolism in the snowflake's journey. Each begins as water vapor, unremarkable, unseen. Each follows its own path through the air, shaped by invisible conditions, until at last it lands upon Earth, a form unlike any other. It is individuality born from universality, diversity emerging from the same foundation. Billions fall, yet none repeat. This uniqueness has long inspired human imagination. Children catch flakes on their tongues, marveling at their shapes. Artists and poets have used snow as a symbol of purity, impermanence, or renewal. In many cultures, snowfall marks not only the depth of winter but also the promise of spring. For beneath the cover of snow, seeds wait, protected and nourished until warmth returns. To reflect on the life of a snowflake is to reflect on the interplay of fragility and power. Alone, it is delicate, vanishing in a heartbeat. Together, they change landscapes, shape climates, and sustain lives. They teach us that small things, multiplied, hold immense strength, and that beauty need not endure forever to be meaningful. When you see snowfall, you are witnessing not chaos but harmony, a choreography of crystals, each with its own story, descending in silence. To walk through such a storm is to walk among countless works of art, each one unique, each one fleeting, each one part of something greater. For most of human history, ice was not simply a backdrop to life, but a resource, rare in some places, abundant in others, and always holding a power to preserve, protect, and astonish. Long before refrigeration, long before electricity, people found ways to gather and store it, carrying frozen water from high mountains to cities, carving it from rivers in winter, and building houses of stone or clay to keep it from melting through summer heat. Ice became not just a natural presence, but a tool that reshaped how societies lived and thrived. In ancient Persia, great domed structures called yakhchals were built to store ice. Their thick walls of mud brick kept the interior cool, even when desert temperatures soared outside. Ice was gathered in winter or carried from distant mountains, then stored in these vaults for use in warmer months. There, in the arid heat, people could enjoy chilled drinks or preserve food that otherwise would have spoiled. Ice became a luxury, not only a matter of survival but also of comfort and celebration. The Chinese harvested ice as early as 1,000 years before the Common Era, storing blocks cut from frozen rivers in insulated pits. During the Tang dynasty, ice was delivered to the homes of the wealthy during summer, a privilege that marked status. The frozen water of winter became a sign of refinement and abundance, linking the seasons together through human ingenuity. In Europe, before mechanical refrigeration, ice houses stood as essential structures on estates and in cities. These subterranean chambers, often shaded and covered, kept ice cut from lakes and ponds through the winter months, preserving it for the heat of summer. Food could be kept longer, drinks cooled, and gatherings made more lavish. The ability to command ice outside its natural season was a mark of power, a demonstration that wealth could extend beyond the rhythms of nature. By the 19th century, the trade in ice became global. In New England, massive blocks were cut from frozen lakes, loaded onto ships, and carried as far as India and the Caribbean. The frozen cargo, insulated with sawdust, would sometimes survive months at sea. It was said that ice from a Massachusetts pond could cool drinks in Calcutta or Havana. This trade transformed economies, linking distant parts of the world with something as ephemeral as frozen water. With the arrival of refrigeration, ice became ordinary, available to nearly everyone at the turn of a switch. What had once been rare and precious became commonplace, filling drinks, preserving food, chilling medicines. The marvel became utility, yet even in its ordinariness, ice retained its cultural place. It was a symbol of refreshment, of comfort, of small luxuries enjoyed in everyday life. Ice also holds a place in art and ritual. In Japan, shaved ice desserts have been celebrated for centuries, their delicate crystals flavored with syrups and shared in summer festivals. In Northern Europe, winter festivals centered on frozen rivers, where markets, games, and gatherings took place upon the ice itself. Across cultures, frozen water became both necessity and joy, both survival and celebration. The story of ice in human culture reveals more than ingenuity. It shows desire. People sought to command ice not only because it sustained them, but because it offered a taste of control over time. To keep food from spoiling, to cool the air in heat, to enjoy what should belong to another season, ice allowed humans to bend nature's rhythm, even briefly. And yet, for all the ways it has been used and stored, ice remains itself, fleeting, fragile, melting at the touch of a hand. Its presence in culture is a reminder that even the most practical tools can carry wonder, that something so simple as frozen water can change the way people live, connect, and celebrate. Beneath the soils of the Arctic lies a world caught between solid and liquid, alive and dormant. This is permafrost, ground frozen for thousands of years, binding soil, rock, and organic matter in an icy grip. For most of its existence, it has been steady, a quiet foundation beneath tundra and boreal forest. But as the climate warms, permafrost begins to soften, shifting the boundaries between frozen past and present life. Permafrost is not uniform. In some places it lies only a meter below the surface. In others it extends hundreds of meters deep. It is a vault of frozen history, holding not only ancient soils and roots but also animals long extinct. Mammoths and woolly rhinos have been uncovered, their bodies preserved with startling detail, fur still intact, muscles still defined, even stomach contents recognizable. Creatures that walked the earth tens of thousands of years ago reappear, as though waking from a long sleep beneath the frost. The thawing of permafrost releases more than bones. Microbes and seeds, dormant for centuries, have been found viable once exposed. In laboratories, plants have been coaxed back to life from seeds frozen for 30,000 years, blooming again under sunlight. In this sense, permafrost is a time capsule, storing not only records of the past but possibilities for renewal. Yet the release is not only wonder. Organic matter long locked in ice begins to decompose when thawed, releasing carbon dioxide and methane, gases that warm the atmosphere further. In this way, the melting ground becomes a feedback, a cycle where thaw leads to warmth, and warmth to more thaw. The frozen foundation that once steadied landscapes now shifts, altering ecosystems, collapsing ground, reshaping rivers and forests. Communities in the Arctic know these changes firsthand. Houses built upon steady ground tilt as permafrost softens, roads buckle, pipelines twist, lakes form where none existed before. What was once permanence is now flux, and adaptation becomes essential. The shifting boundaries of frozen soil remind us that even what seems most solid can transform. Still, in this transformation lies a quiet reminder of continuity. The mammoth emerging from ice is not only a relic but also a storyteller, carrying traces of a time when vast herds roamed across plains now hidden under tundra. Seeds sprouting after millennia whisper that life's potential endures, waiting patiently beneath the surface. Even as boundaries blur, the story of Earth unfolds in ways both startling and humbling. There is also a lesson for us in the patience of permafrost. It teaches that dormancy is not absence. What rests beneath the surface is not gone but waiting. Just as frozen ground holds memory for thousands of years, so too our own bodies and minds carry rhythms of stillness and renewal. Sleep itself is a kind of permafrost, time set aside where processes continue quietly, unseen, preparing us for what comes next. If rest comes to you now, it is part of that same cycle, a softening into stillness that will one day give way to awakening. The thawing of frozen ground may bring challenge, but it also reminds us that time never halts. What was hidden returns, what was still begins again, and what was thought lost may find renewal. In the shifting boundaries of permafrost, we glimpse the deep connection between past and present, silence and emergence, rest and renewal. Though ice is often linked with silence, it has always been a maker of sound. Not just the deep groans of glaciers or the sharp cracks of frozen lakes, but an entire spectrum of tones that form their own kind of music. To listen closely to frozen landscapes is to discover a soundscape shaped by temperature, pressure, and the meeting of water with air. And where nature offers a voice, humans have long joined in, weaving their own music around the resonance of ice. In winter forests, the creak of tree trunks under frost is a song in itself. Water within the wood expands as it freezes, and the strain releases sudden cracks that echo through the stillness. On frozen rivers, the ice sings in booms and chimes as it contracts in the night air. Each sound is unexpected, like a spontaneous performance that no one rehearsed, yet all can hear. Even the smallest moments carry sound. Icicles drip and freeze again, each drop a note that resonates as it strikes. Snow underfoot crunches differently depending on the cold. A crisp crackle when temperatures fall low enough to harden each crystal into glassy shards. These details may seem ordinary, but together they form a symphony of winter, a reminder that silence is never absolute. In cultures across the north, people have listened to and echoed these sounds. In Scandinavia, musicians have carved instruments from ice itself. Horns, drums, even violins have been sculpted from frozen water, their tones fragile yet haunting. Performances take place in ice hotels or winter festivals, where the music exists only for as long as the instruments last. Once the stage warms, the song ends, never to be repeated in the same way. The impermanence of the sound becomes part of its beauty. The Inuit and Sami, living alongside frozen landscapes for centuries, carry traditions of song that blend with the sounds of ice and wind. Their music, shaped by the rhythms of the environment, often mirrors the cadence of cracking ice or the whisper of snow across open ground. It is not imitation alone, but recognition, an acknowledgement that human voice is only one strand in a wider chorus. Modern scientists, too, have begun to record the voices of ice in ways that turn them into music. Hydrophones placed beneath Antarctic shelves capture the crackling of melting ice, the low rumble of distant carving, the hiss of bubbles escaping as frozen air finds freedom. Played back through speakers, these sounds seem otherworldly, as if the planet itself were speaking in tones we rarely hear. There is something meditative in listening to such recordings. The deep groans stretch like organ notes, long and resonant. The high cracks ring sharp and fleeting, like struck glass. Together, they create a soundscape that is both alien and familiar, reminding us that even the most solid-seeming structures are alive with motion. For those who pause to listen, the sound of ice carries lessons. It tells us that silence is textured, layered, alive with hidden detail. It shows us that change often begins with sound too subtle for casual hearing, a whisper before the fracture, a murmur before the release. And it reminds us that music does not belong to humans alone, but to the world itself, which sings in ways we are only beginning to notice. When you walk on a frozen morning, hearing the crunch beneath your feet or the distant groan of a river sealed by frost, you are part of this soundscape. Each step, each breath, each note of the frozen world joins in a composition that is never repeated, unique to that moment, that season, that place. Ice does not keep silence, it keeps rhythm, and in its rhythm, we hear the voice of time, patient and enduring. At the very edges of the earth lie two vast kingdoms of ice. To the north, the Arctic Ocean wears its shifting shield of frozen water, and to the south, the continent of Antarctica lies crowned with the thickest ice sheet on the planet. These are not empty expanses, though they may seem distant and forbidding. They are guardians, regulating the balance of the entire globe, holding the rhythms of climate, sea, and sky in delicate accord. The Arctic, a frozen ocean surrounded by land, is a place of constant motion. Sea ice forms each winter, retreats in summer, and in its advance and withdrawal sets the pace of global currents. When the ice is thick and extensive, sunlight reflects strongly back into space, cooling the planet. When it retreats, dark waters absorb more heat, altering weather patterns thousands of kilometers away. The Arctic, though remote, sends ripples through every climate system, guiding winds, storms, and rains far beyond its horizon. Antarctica, by contrast, is a continent buried under ice, up to 4 kilometers thick. Its weight presses the land beneath it, its mass shapes ocean currents, and its vastness stores nearly 70% of Earth's fresh water. Ice shelves fringe its coasts, acting as gates that regulate the flow of glaciers into the sea. The presence or absence of these shelves determines how quickly the continent's frozen heart releases its contents into the ocean. Without Antarctica's icy crown, sea levels would be many meters higher, coastlines redrawn, cities altered beyond recognition. Both poles also serve as engines of the ocean itself. Cold, dense water forms where sea ice pushes salt into the surrounding seas, sinking into the depths and driving global currents. These currents distribute heat and nutrients, sustaining marine life and moderating climates. The steady rhythm of the poles, freezing and thawing, sets the pulse of the oceans, upon which much of life depends. For the animals that live there, the poles are not simply guardians of climate but homes of resilience. In the Arctic, polar bears prowl across floes, seals surface through narrow breathing holes, and whales navigate icy waters guided by memory and song. In Antarctica, penguins gather in colonies so vast they seem endless, while krill swarm in the millions beneath the ice, feeding birds, fish, and mammals alike. Life has flourished at these edges not in spite of the cold, but because of the unique stability ice provides. Humans, too, have found meaning in these distant places. Explorers described them as hostile, yet also spoke of awe at their beauty. The gleaming silence of endless snowfields, the grandeur of mountains rising from ice, the sight of auroras dancing across frozen skies. Scientists now regard the poles as sentinels of change, watching them closely, for what happens there is a warning of what may unfold elsewhere. The poles are sensitive, shifting first, whispering to us through their retreat and fracture. That balance is fragile, that guardianship is not unshakable. There is symbolism in their role as well. To have guardians at the edges is to recognize that the margins of our world are not separate from its center. The Arctic and Antarctic are boundaries, yet their influence reaches everywhere, binding the planet together through water, light, and air. Their endurance is our endurance, their silence, our stability. In this way, the poles embody the paradox of guardianship, distant yet intimate, fragile yet essential, seemingly silent yet full of influence. To dwell upon their presence is to realize that what appears remote often holds the greatest sway, and that what seems still is, in truth, shaping the flow of life everywhere. Not all of ice's creations are massive glaciers or vast frozen seas. Some of its most delicate works appear in quiet corners, on windowpanes in the early morning, on rooftops after a storm, or on the bare branches of trees touched by cold air. These are ephemeral sculptures, fragile forms shaped by the simplest meeting of water and frost, artworks that last only until the sun or a breath of wind changes them. Icicles are among the most familiar of these creations. They form when water drips slowly from a surface, each drop freezing as it falls. Layer by layer, a tapering column grows, lengthening downward, clear as glass, yet sharp and strong. Sunlight passing through reveals prisms of color, rainbows glinting briefly in their cores. In the stillness of winter nights, they hang like silent bells, waiting for the warmth of day to melt them into memory. Frost etchings are even more intricate. On the cold surface of glass, vapor crystallizes into delicate patterns, ferns, feathers, and branching stars. No two panes carry the same design. These icy sketches form spontaneously, without plan or repetition, as water molecules lock together along invisible lines of stress and impurity. To wake and see frost across a window is to glimpse a gallery of art created in the hours while the world slept. By midday, sunlight erases the gallery, leaving only the memory of its fragile exhibition. On trees and grasses, hoarfrost creates another kind of sculpture. When air is moist and temperatures low, crystals coat every surface, thickening twigs into radiant white, transforming fields into landscapes that sparkle with crystalline light. Each blade of grass becomes edged with frozen lace, each branch adorned with a gown of silver. A breeze may dislodge the crystals, turning the air into glitter, a snowfall created not from clouds, but from frost itself. Even snowdrifts carry artistry in their folds. Wind sculpts them into curves and ridges, soft waves frozen mid-motion. Dunes rise in shapes that mimic deserts, though they are made not of sand but of countless tiny crystals bound together. To walk across them is to walk among sculptures carved by air, always changing, always renewed. By morning, yesterday's shapes may be gone, replaced with new lines, new edges, new textures. The beauty of these small creations lies in their impermanence. We cannot preserve them except in memory or image. Their value is in their presence, in the fleeting encounter between cold air, water, and light. They remind us that not all wonder must endure to matter. Some of the most moving experiences are those we cannot hold, those that vanish even as we admire them. For many, these ephemeral sculptures carry personal meaning. Children marvel at the shimmer of icicles, their curiosity sparked by something so ordinary yet enchanting. Artists find inspiration in frost patterns, echoing their branching forms in drawings and designs. Photographers rise before dawn to capture the brief moment when hoarfrost adorns the landscape. Each interaction is an acknowledgement that beauty, even in its briefest appearance, has power to change the way we see the world. In a broader sense, these fragile works of ice remind us of the transience of all things. Just as frost melts and icicles fall, so too do moments in life pass, often before we are ready to let them go. Yet, within their impermanence lies their meaning. They ask us to pay attention, to notice, to be present in the instant of their existence. For in doing so, we find that impermanence itself can be exquisite. Ice does not only build monuments that endure for ages, it also writes poems upon windows, paints silver across fields, and hangs jewels from rooftops. These fleeting sculptures are part of its artistry, equal in wonder to glaciers and seas, reminding us that beauty is found not only in what lasts, but also in what vanishes. From the vast ice sheets of Antarctica to the fragile lace of frost upon a window, frozen water has shaped the story of our planet and the story of our lives. It has carved valleys, fed rivers, preserved histories, and mirrored the sun's light back into space. It has taught patience through glaciers, wonder through snowflakes, and humility through its fragility. To walk through the narrative of ice is to walk through time itself, to see in frozen water both permanence and impermanence, endurance and transience. Ice is more than a substance, it is a rhythm. It advances and retreats, freezes and thaws, appears and vanishes. In this rhythm, landscapes rise and fall, ecosystems adapt and flourish, civilizations are sustained. Its cycles connect the highest mountains to the deepest oceans, the most distant poles to the fields and forests where people live each day. Through its silence and its sound, its hardness and its fragility, it carries the balance of the world in its crystalline hands. What we see of ice is only the surface. Beneath lie stories too vast for one lifetime. Ice ages that swallowed continents, frozen deserts where life endures against all odds, hidden lakes beneath Antarctica waiting in their secrecy, snowflakes that write endless variations upon a single theme. Each story, whether colossal or minute, reveals the artistry of frozen water, the way it sculpts without intention, preserves without asking, transforms without fanfare. In its presence, we are invited to consider our own place in time. We hurry through days measured in minutes, but ice reminds us that meaning can unfold across centuries. We cling to permanence, but ice shows us the beauty of impermanence, of snow that falls and melts, of frost that vanishes with dawn. We fear silence, yet ice teaches us that silence can be alive, full of whispers, full of song. The endless cycle of ice is not one of loss, but of renewal. What melts will fall again as snow. What vanishes from a glacier may one day return in another form, another age. Even when ice retreats, it leaves behind valleys fertile for life, rivers flowing to the sea, soil enriched by the minerals it carried. Its seeming disappearance is not an end, but a transformation, a reminder that nothing in nature is ever truly gone. To dwell with ice is to dwell with patience, humility, and awe. It does not demand attention, yet it shapes everything. It does not speak loudly, yet it holds the voices of ages. It does not endure unchanged, yet in its changes lies the balance of earth itself. And as you listen now, perhaps you sense that rhythm within yourself. Just as ice follows cycles of rest and renewal, so too do we. There are moments of energy and movement, moments of stillness and pause. Both are necessary, both are natural, both belong to the same cycle. In this way, ice is not distant but intimate, teaching us that slowing, waiting, and yielding are as vital as striving, growing, and advancing. The story of ice is the story of Earth's endurance, of life's resilience, of time's vast canvas painted in frost and thaw. It is a story without end, for as long as water flows and cold air lingers, ice will return, in patterns new yet familiar, in forms fleeting yet eternal in their repetition. And now, as our journey with ice comes to rest, may its quiet rhythm stay with you, steady, patient, enduring. We from Sleeping with Science wish you a good night.